That's me a long time ago. Good morning, everybody. Super glad to be here. Want to thank the Creative Mornings team and Drew for putting this on because this is important, important stuff. I think of myself inherently as a creative, and Drew reached out to me and came over and we talked a little bit, and then we had a hard time connecting. I think for a month. He's emailing and different, like most creatives, we're kind of all over the place. So I got a bunch of email addresses, and he's like, finally calls the shop. I don't know why you didn't call the shop earlier, Drew. But 2 weeks prior to actually this day, we connected. And I remember when he was sending me over themes, and I'm like, end, preserve, like, duh. Like, okay. Who picked these themes? And so I started thinking a little bit about what resonated with me about end. And in my life, I've used the idea of where you want to get to as a measure to start. So, I built houses for years, and before you ever touch a piece of the real estate, you got to find out if what you want to do fits on it, right? So you got to start with the end in mind. And I'm like, wow, okay. I've been using this all my life, so end really resonates with me. Let's talk about it. And, for me, I believe that creativity is freedom. I believe it's freedom and wealth. I think about people like LeBron James. No one taught him how to play basketball. He was born that way. I think about Michael Jackson, right? That kid's been doing what he was doing since he was born almost. And his creativity became his freedom as well as his wealth. And I remember years ago, which is why this kind of somber black and white photo of me when I was a kid, because I was trying to figure out life. And I recall, I'll go back a little bit. I started my first business when I was 7 years old in Jackson, Mississippi. It was a lawnmower business. I'm from the South, and most of my family owns businesses, so I grew up around entrepreneurship. I told my mom one morning, I was like 8. I'm like, I don't never want to have a job. I ain't never working for nobody. And she looked at me, she's like, okay. But then she told me something that stuck with me, and I use it all the time. She said, your gift will make room for you. I'm like, oh, that's dope. Okay. And so, when I think about the older version of me, I've learned that, yes, creativity is freedom plus wealth, but creativity unbridled can become chaos. I think about artists who say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, how? And I've learned I'm a creative, but I had to put structure around my creative goals and dreams and aspirations. So I wanted to build $1 million company. How? You need an accountant. There's a structure. You need a lawyer. There's a structure. You need someone who is really good at framing. There's a structure. I used to do all those things and didn't realize my real gift was the creative part. So I tried to start staying in my lane and be creative and let people who were good at the technical work add the structure to avoid chaos. Because Lord knows I had a bunch of chaotic experiences prior to learning this. And I think that's just part of being an artist, right? You lead with one part of your brain, but as I've discovered scale, you have to put some reins around it. And so I think about like Biggie Smalls, right? Here's this awesome rapper on the corners of New York. I mean, he's like the best. But without Puffy, there is no Notorious B.I.G., the legendary rapper, because he just wants to like battle rap every day all day. And so I'm of this generation, and there's a quote that really resonates with me from Common. My generation never understood working for the man. Like, never. I remember being in North High, and I grew up in the era where it was Murder-apolis. Maybe y'all remember that time where we had the highest murder rate per capita in the nation. Well, I lived amongst all of that. And my friends and I, we were ambitious. We didn't, we were like, I still don't want to have a job. And at 14, out on some street corner, I was hustling, trying to make money. I got arrested. I was selling drugs. I didn't want to work for anybody. And even though I came from a great family, you grow up around this, and it's the allure of the street life. And I remember getting out of juvenile detention on a Sunday. No one gets out of jail on Sunday. But I got out of jail because a good friend of mine, who was a mentor, knew a federal judge. I maybe shouldn't be telling this right now. And he said, that's a good kid. We need to get him out of there. And the loudspeaker, Houston, get your stuff. Huh? And the cell unlocked. And my punishment was I had to get a job. I'm like, okay. And so I go to this office building. My job was to clean. I go to this office building, and we do our our onboarding, whatever they call it. They show us what to do, and then the manager walks off, and he says, well, you can put your coats in the back room and then get started. I looked around. I'm like, I can't do this. And so I ran. And I left. And I told my friend, I'm like, I just can't do it. We're gonna have to talk to the judge about something else. Because I cannot work for anybody, not in that sense. And I was 14 years old. And so I started cutting hair in the basement. I started selling t-shirts in the halls of North High. And by the time I was 16, I was making $950 a week. And I know that because I was making more than my mom at the time. There's a lot of money in 1994 for a young kid. So I figured my way forward creatively, and that's been my journey. There's me again, the much thinner version in the middle, with a couple of my, what we call big homies. So I was 18 years old in that photo. And we had this slogan, Operation Fade the World. These guys were 4 years older than me, so they're barbers. And I started barber school when I was 17 years old, graduated. And this was actually my birthday celebration. I had just graduated barber school, 1997. And I remember one of the greatest gifts I ever got was from these fellas, and it's right here. I'm dating myself a little bit. This tape, and I keep it because this is one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. And they went to a conference by Miles Monroe, and it was titled The Power of Personal Vision. And I'm like, okay. So I listened and I listened and I listened. I lived in Burnsville at the time and worked in Minneapolis, so my commute was quite long. And he talked about the importance of writing things down and understanding what you're trying to do. So I said, all right, I'm gonna dream big. 18 years old. I wanna, year one, I wanna make $60,000. I wanna own a barbershop, and I want a Yukon, which my mentor tried to talk me out of. He's like, why would you want a big ass piece of metal to drive around? Makes no sense. But I got it, right? All three of those things I accomplished. 19 years old, I was on a tear. I was just like, oh, I can do anything with this. I can write things down and dream and work. And then I started a couple businesses where I just kind of was feeling myself too much. I didn't have the proper business structure. I didn't have the proper accounting, right? I'm writing things down on the notepad and like, and a few of them failed. And so the barbershop, which is, we call the Black Man's Country Club, I started to talk to people who helped me think through a bunch of these other things that I was missing. And that's when, the mature version of the entrepreneur started to emerge. And I started a company in 2003, which we were all over the place, building houses. Well, we started remodeling. Some really bad work. But we got better. But these folks, because they wanted to support a young entrepreneur, they're like, okay, well, if you just fix that, we can deal with the rest. And 4 years later, we had a company that had done $10 million in sales. through this process of being creative, of sticking to it, but then putting those barriers around it to actually give us something that could scale. And so that's always been really important to me. And a part of what I use to this day. And then years later, this place emerges. We're in construction, 2008 hits. Calamity, right? What next? And so my wife and I decided that, you know what, we need to get back. Well, I decided, she had to talk her into it, but that we need to get back to where we're from. We need to get back to where people look like us. We were building these expensive houses, and the only time we came into the city, the only time I came into North Minneapolis really was to see my aunt and to get my hair cut. And so I realized that, though we had become successful, we weren't really making a huge impact for anybody other than ourselves. And so, though there was a horrible economy, there was an opportunity to purchase a building that we bought on 44th Avenue. And for me, really what that place is about is legacy. It's about legacy. There's a quote from James Baldwin, to be black in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And I kind of remixed it a little bit and said to be black in Minnesota is to be a constant state of rage. Because this place is not really built culturally to suit the black perspective in terms of community, in terms of a walkable community where everyone looks like you, where they're doctors, lawyers, the property values, and so on and so forth. And so my wife at the time was working at US Bank, and she's killing the game, she's doing well, but she's the only person that looks like her. We had a house in Robbinsdale, well, later on, and we decided, you know what? We're gonna use this space, this place, to creatively solve our own problem, because we wanted to move. I wanted to get the hell out of Minnesota because it wasn't suited for me. And so we started to use this country club, if you will, as a means to do things that we wanted to do. So we hosted events, we hosted game nights, we hosted Archbishop Hebda. We started to bring in artists and entrepreneurs and politicians to talk about how do we solve this chasm. And out of all that work came this idea of Camden Town. And Camden Town is really, the idea is to create space, where people who look like me and people who have urban subsets can build a thriving community that really represents them. It doesn't solve the state's problem, but it's one of the solutions that if you can repeat it in different pockets, it would help Minnesota feel more like home to black people. When I say black, I'm talking about descendants of slave black. But there's a very different idea, I always joke and I say, it was really cool to have a woman in the White House that used cocoa butter, She can really relate to me, we can speak, but she was in the White House, right? And so there's this notion that you can't, if you're upperly mobile and black, you gotta move to the suburbs, and I don't agree with that. Mrs. Beverly Cotman, who is sitting over there, mother of the village. And it's wild because years ago, and she was my biology teacher, and I hated biology. And she was on me. But because she looked like my mom, my auntie, she loved me into learning. And this is the importance of having a community where the people understand your subset. Because we can all get there, but it takes somebody who has a similar language to interpret the things that you need to learn. And so that's been our whole idea around, yes, we could leave and go to Chicago or DC or anywhere else, or we can decide to stay and use our creativity in our space as a means to have a larger conversation and try to move this work forward. And to date, what's come of it is Governor Walz talked about Camden Town in the state of the state. Mayor Fry talked about Camden Town in the state of the city. We're working with the Minneapolis Chamber to create, a district that is very specific around making sure Minnesota can feel like home to folks that look like me. And it's about land ownership. It's about cultural places that reflect you. It's about people who look like you in diverse job settings. And so in my life, my desire to be free, my creative mind that's kind of all over the place, at some point had to figure out purpose. And you can lead with that creativity, but you gotta put some structure around it and have an end goal. And so that's what I always encourage folks to do, and that's what I try to do. And in conclusion, I always say, no one can beat you being you. Not possible. It's impossible for anybody to beat you being you. And so, my mantra for life is to dream, to plan, and to execute. And I dream big, I dream wild. And then I have mentors who say that can't happen. But out of those conversations, here's what can happen. And here's how we can actually make this plan actionable. Because you only have so much time. You only have so much money. And I found that, when you take this big block of ice and chop it down, you can really get to something that is beautiful. And, that's where execution comes in. And I've used it to scale everything from growing grass in the backyard to laying the framework for what I think potentially could be a great, one of the great solutions to some of the inequalities that are happening in the state of Minnesota. And so I would encourage everyone, first of all, no one can beat you being you. And so the only person I compete with is the dude that's in the mirror every morning. The only person I want to be is myself, but I want to learn from folks. I want to be challenged. I want to push back. And I want to create a rich legacy that when you're gone, folks can say, here's what your life is about. And I'll read something real quick before I finish. And for those of you who don't know, my wife passed away 7 months ago. And it's tough, but, and that's, the slide before was actually a photo of us. But when she passed away, I decided that, I was gonna harness all my grief and burn it like jet fuel creatively. And she is still teaching me to this day, because this is a notepad that she had, and she used to write things down. And this quote about legacy: your legacy is every woman who watched your show and decided to go back to school. Your legacy is every man that decided to forgive his father. It's every gay person who decided to come out because they saw your show. Your legacy is every person you ever touched. Your legacy is how you lived and what you did and what you said every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Houston. Your story was beautiful. My question for you is, what was the hardest thing you had to deliberately end in order to make space for your future vision?
Great question. The hardest thing to deliberately end. There's several. And I think some work that's important to me, deliberately end, scatterbrainness, but I think it's different in different parts of my journey, so I'll give you something recent. Just as an example, a mentor of mine, Kathy Thunheim, talks about the arc. And she says, whatever you're trying to do, there's this arc. And things that fit within that arc, you do, and everything else you have to say no to. And it can be hard to say no. And so I think now as I'm kind of maturing and learning, like I can't do everything. And there are people who are doing good work, and I can say, well, you should talk to them, or because I'm not gonna get to my objective if I try to absorb everyone else's stuff. And so I think it's just being able to just say no sometimes to myself first, because I got, 2 business ideas a day. And it's just, it's not possible.
Thank you, Houston, for coming and talking today. I had a chance to go up to your shop during the North Minneapolis pre-Christmas shop visits, and so it was really cool, and it was nice to see. I'm not originally from Minneapolis, so just nice to get to know some of the businesses. So I have a first question that's deeper, and a second question that's hopefully easy. The first question was around, so you talked about like being supported by people that look like you and building, kind of helping support that community. What do you think about the potential tension that exists around really like supporting and like just, I guess just really speaking and like trying to talk to that need for like that independence and that separation in a way versus the larger Minneapolis culture and that larger community's need and want for connectivity across all the lines. And then part 2 is what is Camden Town? Because I'm from DC. I have no idea what that is.
Well, part 1, I would say I don't care. And I don't mean that in a bad way, right? I no disrespect to anyone. If you're getting what you need, you have no right to tell me, and I'm someone that's not getting what I need, what I don't need, and how it offends you. This is a solution, and the bottom line is I'm friends with Governor Walz. The GDP is going to be affected. Target had an emergency meeting. We can't retain people of color. So for me, I'm a businessman. I bring people solutions. This is a solution to a state problem, right? This is big. This is not just about, oh, we should do this because their lives matter. No. This is all good business, and it's just personal. So if it offends someone, I'm sorry, but I could care less about that. And it's there's a very diverse coalition, I'll say that, right? Culture is dope. Art is something that unites people, whether it's black art or African art or art from, we just had Wisen in a Box, a traveling beer garden from Germany in front of our spot, right? We celebrated German culture and beer and had an Oktoberfest. It's love, it's culture. Like, I want to learn from you and you can learn from me. That's a good thing, right? But my culture is very specific. I'm not going to compromise who I am and what I need to make you feel more comfortable. And the second part of it, I'll say, is Camden Town is an organic place. The things that we've done, as Mayor Fry says, it's the dopest national night out in all of Minneapolis. We're working with Muhammad Lawal and LSE Architecture and the McKnight Foundation and different people to kind of build what it can look like to build a thriving urban community when the people from within it decide what it should look like, not some developers. And that's where I've built things. I've built houses and communities in Brooklyn Park. I know what it's like to cluster build. Folks will say, well, I want this lot, I want this lot. I'm like, no, you should kind of build together so it looks like a neighborhood as opposed to. And that's what North Minneapolis has done. We got different folks working in silos, so it doesn't form a small cluster and a corridor, if you will. And so that's really what it's about, is we need folks moving in proximity. It's about home ownership. You can't, Jay-Z said, don't get killed over the neighborhood that your mama renting. So if you don't own it, it's not your neighborhood. And so it's really based on long-term sustainability. But it's about place. When I walk down the street, I want to hear Erykah Badu playing. And that's what I do every day. I play jazz loud as hell on the speaker. So people know this is what it is.
Hi, thanks so much. What is most important to me and what I enjoyed is you shared the real you in your talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a incredibly valuable thing and something that maybe people don't do as much as they should. So I was interested in how you made the connections you needed and how you found those mentors and built those relationships that have allowed you to learn who you are and develop who you are and be so successful.
Just that, be myself. I've met billionaires and I ask them questions. I got little homies that come into my shop who are failing in school and I ask them questions. And so for me, it's just human connection. Nobody is more or less valuable based on their job title. And I think people just relate to folks that are real. And I just, I'm from Mississippi and my bullshit meter is high. And I just, what's the point of being, I grew up around doctors from the Mayo Clinic. I grew up around drug dealers in North Minneapolis. There's no, right? It's just people. So, yeah.
Hey, Houston.
Hey.
So I know you're one of the original class of juxtaposition arts.
Yeah.
And I also know that there are a lot of people in this room who have no idea what juxtaposition arts is. So I would like you to tell them what juxta is. And also, I'm just curious for myself what it was like during the 90s, just in the creative community, being black as a creative in the 90s.
Yeah. Juxta. Juxtaposition is a youth-led arts collective in North Minneapolis that's run by Deanna and Roger Cummings. I mean, they're doing some amazing work, right? So how Juxta started was really in North Minneapolis. In the class that we were in 1994, our instructor, God bless this man, because he had the vision to realize I need to bring some other people in. So he brought Peyton Russell and Roger Cummings in to be kind of our guest instructors. As we started doing work, we realized, wow, this is really cool. And Peyton was encouraging us, and we were really stretching ourselves as artists, and he was giving us hard critiques, like that's whack. Like the teacher wouldn't say that's whack. They'd be like, you need to maybe change this. And he pushed us, and then after, that's how I started selling t-shirts, is Peyton allowed me to come to his studio. And so instead of selling drugs, I went to his studio and made t-shirts and sold them every day in school. And so the summer, I think, of '95, tons of that class went to his studio that was on Washington Avenue. They outgrew it. Peyton was a martial artist, so he kind of took off, so we brought Roger and Deanna in. Eventually, they rented a house somewhere, and this is after my time. And it just started to grow from there, and now they're in the midst of I think it's a $14 million capital campaign for a new, yeah. And so just to see like how that little nugget sparked what is about to be an amazing anchor in North Minneapolis. And the creative scene in the 90s was amazing. I mean, the music, the fashion, it's like there was so much negative news, especially in like North Minneapolis, but we felt like, if you've ever heard the song by Souls of Mischief, 93 Till Infinity, that's how it felt, or a Tribe Called Quest record. It just felt good, it just felt vibrant, I loved it, and Peyton often says, I've never met a cohort that was as diverse and creative as you guys were across the board. And I think it was a lot of that. I mean, our basketball teams we were winning state championships, so it was like the coolest thing ever. Yeah, I didn't go to school much, but.
Awesome, thank you.
We also got time for one more.
So
I've lived in a lot of other places, and I've seen that sometimes when communities start, like I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and this happened with the Mission. A lot of artists, in this case, lived in the Mission, and then it became gentrified. As communities develop this vibrancy, white people become attracted to it. What can white people do to support but not appropriate?
It's a great question. I mean, it is an easy question. It's just that. But what I've told a lot of folks who are moving in proximity is you got to get involved in the politics. Art's great, but the people who really run shit are in those board meetings. They're in those neighborhood meetings. I started the business district. I work with the Northeast Chamber, the Minneapolis Chamber, because those are the people who really get to dictate the terms of the neighborhood. And I think a lot of other times creatives or people just feel like, oh, I'm holding space. It's our neighborhood. No, you're not. The people who are building from a business perspective and legislative, those are the folks who really run the neighborhood. So I think, again, you gotta take creativity and structure and marry the two to really, and that, quite frankly, is part of the conversation at the outset. That's why I'm a part of this work. I got other stuff to do. But it's important to me to at least set the framework for how we make sure there's improvement, but not displacement. And that's a balancing act. That's where the relationships with the governor and the mayor and different folks is like, let's design this. How much affordable housing to market rate? How fast? All these kinds of things. And folks from outside, how they can support is just that, support. Hashtag Camden Town, Minneapolis, right? Support the idea, support the notion. Don't question it or talk bad about it or say, that's how you could be supportive, I think. So, yeah. Cool.